Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're unpacking one of the most famous literary and historical narratives from the ancient world, the Wilderness Trial, found right there in Matthew 4, verses 1 through 11. We're going to take a totally impartial, text-based look at this incredible encounter. You know, whether you read this as theology, history, or just classical literature, the rhetorical structure of this narrative is absolutely fascinating. It's literally a masterclass in debate, defense, and how to leverage historical texts.
So let's set the scene. Think about this. How does extreme isolation and physical deprivation actually frame an epic battle of wits? According to the text, Jesus is led by the Spirit straight into the wilderness. He's completely removed from society, from comfort, and from his followers. The narrative purposefully strips away all external support to isolate the protagonist before the antagonist, the devil, ever even enters the picture.
And then the text gives us this very specific, very intense number, 40. Jesus fasted for an exhausting 40 days and 40 nights out there. Verse 2 tells us, quite simply and starkly, that he was hungry. By highlighting this extreme physical condition, the text establishes Jesus' absolute vulnerability. I mean, this upcoming confrontation, it isn't happening in some comfortable debate hall. It's happening at the absolute limits of human physical endurance.
Now there's a really fascinating detail hidden right there in the footnotes of the source text. The original Greek word used in Matthew 4:1 can actually be translated as either being tempted or being tested. This dual meaning brilliantly frames the whole narrative that follows. It tells us we're not just looking at a simple trap designed to make someone fail. It's an examination. It's a profound trial of resolve, identity, and authority. The text organizes this test into a really clear three-part geographical progression. First up, they're out in the desolate wilderness. Next, the narrative abruptly shifts to the holy city, placing them way up on the highest point of the temple. And finally, the scene moves to a very high mountain overlooking all the world's kingdoms, which sets the stage perfectly for the very first confrontation. Section 1. The first test, physical hunger. The tempter immediately targets the most obvious, pressing vulnerability. He approaches Jesus and delivers this highly precise challenge. If you are the Son of God, tell these stones to become bread. Notice the tactic here. The tempter isn't just offering a free meal, he's demanding a display of divine power, using Jesus' extreme physical desperation as leverage. It's a major psychological prod, basically saying, hey, if you really are who you say you are, use your power to solve your immediate problem right now.
And this brilliantly illustrates the first rhetorical parry of the text. Faced with the demand to make bread from stones, Jesus doesn't argue about his identity, and he doesn't perform the miracle. Instead, he issues a rebuttal by saying, "It is written," and directly quotes older scripture. Looking at the textual footnotes, we see he's quoting Deuteronomy 8:3. Man shall not live on bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of God. He completely deflects the physical temptation by elevating the entire conversation to a matter of spiritual sustenance.
Moving on to Section 2, the second test, divine protection.
So, the devil takes Jesus to the highest point of the temple in the holy city. And look at the fascinating textual shift here. The tempter says, if you are the Son of God, throw yourself down. But then, the tempter actually adopts Jesus' own strategy. He says, for it is written, and proceeds to quote the Psalms, specifically Psalm 91, verses 11 and 12, saying that angels will lift him up so he won't strike his foot against a stone. The antagonist is now literally using historical scripture as a weapon, daring Jesus to force a miraculous rescue.
Notice the brilliant contrast in this moment. While the devil manipulates the poetic promises of the Psalms, Jesus expertly shuts down the provocation without taking the bait. He replies, "It is also written, do not put the Lord your God to the test." Once again, the footnotes reveal he's relying steadfastly on Deuteronomy, specifically chapter 6, verse 16. He counters a misapplied text with a foundational law, completely neutralizing the psychological trap.
And that brings us to Section 3, the third test, worldly power.
In the grandest escalation of the entire narrative, set on a very high mountain, the devil shows Jesus all the kingdoms of the world and their splendor. The subtle mind games of the first two tests are gone. The tempter makes an ultimate, direct offer. All this I will give you, if you will bow down and worship me. It is an offer of absolute worldly power, totally bypassing any struggle or suffering. But as we see, it comes with a steep, singular, and absolute price.
At the climax of this exchange, that sweeping offer of all worldly kingdoms is met with a forceful, definitive dismissal. Away from me, Satan. And for the third and final time, he leverages the book of Deuteronomy. He quotes chapter 6, verse 13, "Worship the Lord your God and serve him only." There is absolutely no room left for debate here. The line is drawn entirely in the sand of ancient scripture.
Finally, Section 4, the aftermath.
Verse 11 provides a highly concise conclusion to the narrative. The conflict abruptly ends with two simple actions. First, the devil leaves him. That definitive rejection in the third test resolves the tension entirely. Second, angels came and attended him. It's a really striking piece of literary symmetry, isn't it? Jesus receives the very divine attendance at the end of the trial that he explicitly refused to force during that second test at the temple.
So, the crucial takeaway for us is the brilliant structural pattern of the text as a whole. The author of Matthew constructs a masterfully escalating narrative. We move geographically, from the wilderness to the temple to the mountain. The tests escalate too, from physical hunger to the psychological manipulation of protection to the ultimate temptation of worldly power. But notice the defense. Every single time, the defense is a direct quote from the book of Deuteronomy. Jesus meets an unprecedented supernatural trial using exclusively established historical textual authority.
Which leaves us with a fascinating final thought to chew on. Look at the interplay here. How often do ancient texts rely on even older traditions to establish their ultimate authority? The narrative of Matthew 4 doesn't invent new rules to defeat the tempter. It looks backward to the foundations of its own literary and historical tradition. It really makes you wonder how the texts we rely on today are built upon the echoes of the past. Think about that for a while and keep exploring.